Welcome to FreightWaves Today. It is Tuesday, and I'm sorry, it is Wednesday.
It's Wednesday.
I messed that up. It is Wednesday.
It
is my favorite day. Don't worry.
Rail day.
Tune in. This isn't a taped episode. It is Wednesday. I'm just wrong. These days run together, but it is my favorite day of the week, which is the AAR data comes out. It's Wednesday train day. So we talk about the rails. We dive into it. Tomorrow we will be filming live from the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta, Georgia. It's hot, Atlanta. It is super hot, actually. So we'll be there tomorrow live. I'm super pumped about that. And it's getting us ready for the college football season. Now, you're a Wisconsin fan. You guys going to have a good season, a good team?
I don't
follow it that closely?
College football as much as professional football.
It's all Green Bay for you, right?
In Wisconsin. Yeah, I love the Packers. But it is fun to watch. Like, I still watch with my son and need to take him to a game. So.
I love Marco Rubio was interviewed. What would he do if he wasn't Secretary of State? And he said, or what would the ideal Saturday be? And he talks and he's like a diehard college football fan. And he goes, I'd start with the games. I'd start with college game day and they go all the way. And he talks about how he makes his way across the country to like the late night Pacific games.
Fun.
To like 2 to 3 a.m. And anyway, I used to do that. Like,
really?
I can't do it anymore. It's a lot, but I would go and watch. I would start up at like 9 a.m. when college game day started. Even before that, because ESPN has these like pre-shows.
Yeah.
And then I would watch it all the way until 2 to 3 a.m. where you have these Pacific games. Like the Hawaii game sometimes is like really early. And so that's my favorite time of the year. This is fall.
Almost fall.
It is almost fall.
We got to get through Labor Day first. But yeah, I'm ready.
But the retailers are putting fall wear. I was shopping this weekend and noticed that the fall lineup is starting to hit the stores. This is summerween, as we have been told. But it is train day. My favorite day of the week. We're going to hear about the industrial economy. So lots of interesting opinion this week about the state of the economy, where it's going, where it's headed. But we'll get into that. And the railroads tell us the truth. They tell us what's happening in the industrial economy. It's why I always look forward to it. But we have a real treat today. We have Thom Albrecht, always sort of an institution, always a great resource to tell us about his thoughts. He's at Reliance Partners, one of the largest insurance brokers connected to trucking. And he's also been around this industry for many decades and was on Wall Street before as an analyst. He's got some perspective on the state of freight. We'll hear from him. And then we're going to go deep into the terminal. And we have Ali Klaskow. He is the Bloomberg intelligence analyst for transportation. He's going to tell us about Q4. What does it look like? We have Oliver Sawbridge, who's the senior director of supply chain intelligence from 0 to 100. And then we have Bill Stevens going to wrap up with the rails. Cannot wait. Great show.
Yeah.
Let's get into headlines.
It'll be a great show.
We kick things off with a major cold chain infrastructure bet at one of the fastest growing container gateways on the Atlantic seaboard. Americold has officially opened a roughly $80 million import-export hub at Port St. John in New Brunswick, bringing together 3 strategic partners in one location for the first time. The facility connects Dubai's DP World, which runs the box terminal, with CPKC, whose rail line connects the port to central Canada and beyond, with Americold's temperature-controlled infrastructure sitting between them. The Port St. John project, which provides about 22,000 pallet positions, is the only temperature-controlled storage in eastern Canada directly connected to a port without drayage. It's designed to eliminate the inefficient routing of Canadian-bound cold freight through Philadelphia or Newark, and then trucking it across the border. Container throughput at Port St. John hit a record 239,364 20-foot equivalent units in 2025, up 29.4% year over year and up 175% since 2021, driven by DP World's $247 million Westside modernization that lifted terminal capacity from 150,000 TEUs to 1 million TEUs annually. Over on the rails, BNSF is aggressively expanding intermodal service to capture truck freight between 2 of the Southwest's fastest-growing markets. The Class 1 Railroad has announced an enhanced service connecting the Phoenix metropolitan area with Dallas-Fort Worth, completing the route in just over 3 days from train departure to availability. Driven by rising customer demand as the domestic peak shipping season approaches, the service will now run 6 days a week through the Alliance Intermodal facility in North Texas. The expansion is explicitly aimed at converting over-the-road truck freight to rail, as shippers face tighter capacity and higher highway rates during peak season. BNSF is also setting the stage for future growth, with construction underway on Logistics Park Phoenix, the railroad's second intermodal facility in the Phoenix area, with the first phase slated to open in early 2027. Finally, the U.S. Department of Transportation has approved a major routing shift that positions UPS to strengthen its Asia-Pacific freight network. The regulatory agency approved UPS's request to transfer 6 of its Hong Kong flying rights so it can inaugurate service to Clark Airport in the Philippines, where an expansion project for the carrier's hub is expected to be completed later this year. UPS will immediately transfer all 4 of its service rights to Warsaw, Poland, and 2 of 3 rights to Hanoi, Vietnam, to Clark Airport, and plans to operate the new route using Boeing 767-300 freighter aircraft. The move comes as UPS grows aggressively in Asia, with Asia-to-Asia export volume increasing 13.6% year-over-year in the second quarter, enabled by recent investments in the region. UPS recently broke ground on a major expansion project for its Hong Kong hub and is upgrading its terminal at Incheon Airport in Seoul, South Korea.
Well, it is, this rail intermodal route from Phoenix to Dallas is it's such a powerful corridor. When I started my career, Phoenix was a dead backhaul market. Like if it went in, it did not go out, and trucks would have to deadhead to Southern California. Like you just went to Phoenix and then occasionally Texas. But Texas also, when I started my career, was a backhaul market. Like nothing came out of Texas. It was a really strange, but that's all shifted. Phoenix is now a major, because what's happened is the real estate costs are so significant in Southern California that a lot of the big warehouses and distribution centers have moved from Southern California to Arizona. And it's become a pretty significant outbound state.
Well, and business regulation and specifically labor laws are so hard in California.
Well, they are. It's the environmental stuff.
Going to Phoenix is a huge outlet for that.
It's an NIMBYism.
Phoenix used to be, early in my career, my first job was pricing the West Coast, and it was a dead zone. And Texas was, hit or miss, but I mean, we've seen huge growth in Houston.
Texas
and
was
Dallas.
a dead. So my first territory as a sales rep actually was Montana, but that doesn't count because they sort of sent me into the wild.
There's nothing to sell
as a
in Montana.
As a young boy to figure it out. But so I was like 18, 19 in college. But when I actually started my real career, Texas, DFW, Austin, that was my sales territory. And it was interesting because there was a perspective when I took over. This was in 2001 to 2005. When I was there was a perspective that Texas was a backhaul market. US Express had zero.
It was.
It seemed like zero outbound freight. So trucks would go in, they would not get loaded, and rates would come out dirt cheap. But what's happened over the last 20 years is Texas is becoming a major manufacturing center. And so, by the way, so has Arizona.
Yeah.
And it's NIMBYism, it's labor laws, it's the NIMBYism in California, and it's all of the things that you would expect to see in a more business-friendly state. I would argue that Phoenix, Arizona is a modern miracle. Like, you think about that.
Oh my gosh, it's a desert.
God did not intend us to live in Arizona because it's a desert. They have to bring their water. Like, it's hot as frick. It is not intended, but it is a modern miracle, as is Las Vegas. But I don't know, God intended Las Vegas to exist. But definitely Phoenix. It definitely. So let's bring in Thom Albrecht.
This lane, though, the one thing about this lane, it's so, one, BN needs to make some headlines and continue to expand their service offerings in the midst of this merger. But 2, more evidence that we'll talk about a little bit in the Sonar update of that mode shift from truckload to intermodal. So they specifically said they've seen demand. They want to take advantage of that. It's a 3-day train, so it's 1,000 miles from Phoenix to Dallas. So really pretty good on transit time compared to over the road. So it makes a lot of sense. And historically, you've really tried to
Like,
really, it's only adding a half day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works. You still have the drayage portion, which may add a day or 2 to the transit.
Building the train as well, unless it's scheduled.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's going to run 6 days a week now, so it will be scheduled 6 days a week.
So this is the old UPS. UPS was sort of the first parcel expedite carrier to demand train service, and then FedEx sort of caught wind. I think FedEx was more enamored with airplanes at the time than UPS was. But I remember when UPS was doing that fast expedited train. So let's bring our first guest in. Many of you know our first guest, Thom Albrecht. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of Reliance Partners, which is one of the largest insurance brokers in trucking. That's all they do over there at Reliance. It's a big market, so you go there. But Thom is an institution. He's been around this industry for decades. Thom, you worked on Wall Street. We're talking earlier on air because this is our train day. It's our rail day. It's our favorite day of the week. It's Wednesday. As the railroads go, when you started your career on Wall Street, there was nobody really monitoring the railroads.
Yeah, it was a really special time. So while I'm known more for trucking and my role around that for the last 3+ decades, my early coverage was built around the railroads. There were 15 public railroads and only 2 to 3 analysts per public railroad. Nobody wanted to touch them. Money managers didn't want to touch them. Today, I think there's 5 public railroads and everyone's got at least 30 analysts. So we could get in and make gigantic calls that were different. The first one that we did was the old Santa Fe. They had paid a special $40 a share dividend back in 1989 to fend off some corporate raiders. They took on all this debt. I had a boss who was like, this company is asset rich. And so his thesis to me, and he made me go research it, was the company's going to have to split up and IPO all these divisions. So they had the railroad, which owned, at that time, it was incredible. I think they owned 2% of California, 2% of Arizona, 1% of Nevada. So they took public a real estate company. They had Santa Fe.
You mean
Energy.
they had the real
estate,
real
like
estate,
that
not
set
like
of
freight
land mass.
share.
Yeah,
Holy
right.
Wow,
yeah,
wow.
I mean, they owned, and so it was a public company. I think it was called Catalyst, Catellus.
That's huge.
They had Santa Fe Energy that they took public, Santa Fe Gold, and the railroad. I think there was a 5th one, but we made a killing for investors.
So it's interesting, I've been, and Julie knows this because I talk about it often, I'm just enamored with history, and particularly the railroad history. And it's interesting how these businesses, these railroads, I mean, they built America. Like that is the reason we have this massive manifest destiny expansion. But it's interesting how much incentive, there was a lot of corruption. This is the Gilded Age. But also like how much the federal government working with the territories really wanted this expansion and infrastructure and was willing to fund it to really build what is the modern economy. And it's amazing how these families and these companies just acquired so much real estate. I mean, the whole state of Florida was built by railroads. Was it the Flagglers that built that entire?
I believe so,
that entire state? It's just really fascinating.
It is, and all the railroads that used to be around. I grew up near St. Louis, but there used to be a railroad in my town called the Alton Railroad, and they were one of many thousands that went away after the Staggers Act in 1980. But it was a fascinating time. I loved it. There were railroads that eventually got bought out that we covered when nobody covered them. Chicago Northwestern. There was a little bitty one down in Memphis called the Mid-South Railroad that got bought out for a killing. And so we could get in and make a difference. We had a similar call on the Burlington Northern that it was going to be more worth some of its parts. And so we made a call that they would split up as well. And again, nobody was following them. We followed Conrail. And eventually I shifted full-time more to the trucking industry around 93, 94.
So let's talk a little bit about, you got your career started on Wall Street. You've come through all of these cycles. When did you start in freight? Like when was your first born on date?
1989.
Okay, so you came in, deregulation was 9 years in. We're sort of past the initial shock. A lot of the pre-deregulation motor carriers had filed bankruptcy. And this is still at a time when the railroads were a disaster, right?
Right.
They were sort of getting their act together. They were deleveraging. They were having to respond to market conditions.
They were, but they hadn't had the Presidential Emergency Board yet, so they were still running 5-man crews. But one of the first stock calls that we made in trucking was the old American FreightWaves. They had gone public in 1990. In 91, I think it was, there was a unionized LTL carrier down in Arkansas called Jones that was over-levered. They filed bankruptcy, and American Freight, back then it was Arkansas FreightWaves, pre-American FreightWaves, the stock more than doubled the very next day. And then they ended up having an earnings
Because of the bankruptcy.
because of the bankruptcy. A unionized LTL carrier in their backyard
Went under.
And so again, nobody was following these things, and so we had a lot of fun.
And American FreightWaves eventually gets bought by FedEx a couple years later. Fred
Correct.
Smith wants to be in LTL, ends up buying it.
Well, it was really about 9 or 10 years later. It was 2000 when that happened.
So, Thom, how would you describe the current market? If you've gone through all these cycles, what does the current market look like?
Well, I think it's the most fascinating supply dynamics I've seen in my career. Demand has been so-so, but I think it got a little bit better in June and July. One of the things that we look at, Craig and Julie, is if you look at the Purchasing Managers Index report, people look at all the traditional numbers there. But I also like to look at the sentiment. They always tell you, out of the 18 surveys or industries that are surveyed, how many are actually growing? And I went back and looked at that. So in September of last year, only 4 out of 18 industries said they were growing.
And this is really tied to industrial production.
It is, but then in January it was 9. So finally half of the industries reporting. In June it was 14, and then in July it was 15.
Yeah.
So we have seen demand improve. I think, I don't know that anybody's using the word robust. It's still overwhelmingly a supply story, but finally there was some demand improvement in the second quarter.
We've been monitoring the data since really November is when we saw the turn in demand. It's interesting because we cover the railroads extensively. If you look at the AAR's monthly report that they put out, State of Rails, essentially, what they said was that the rail freight index was the second highest number since 2008. And what's really interesting about that, as we'll get into it with Bill Stevens later in the show, is just the railroads tell you what is actually happening, what's moving by commodity type. And what's interesting is you talked about ISM data and PMI broadening in terms of activity. You're also seeing that in the railroads, is the kinds of commodities. If you take coal out, which coal is in a perpetual decline, you know, no matter how often the federal government keeps trying to prop it up to give the West Virginia coal miners and Pennsylvania coal miners some love, it's not going to matter. Coal is a doomed commodity. But what's interesting about it is that the other stuff is actually growing. And we're starting to see more physical goods production in the United States, which really hasn't existed for at least a decade in terms of expansion.
And the two commodities I like to track are chemicals, which I actually haven't looked at for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but that's always a proxy for future, industrial activity, and then the scrap metal. Because that can be remade into anything. So
Coke is also one of my favorite things to look at because it tells you a lot about steel mills. Coke is not what you drink. It is the stuff that goes into making really heavy metal. So they use it, they need a lot of heat, and that's where they use the coke because it just burns so efficiently at a very high heat. And that tells us a lot about steel. And we're seeing coke shipments up at significant levels. The one that always surprises me, but we've seen it, is the grain shipments, grain exports. Because you hear about the trade war, the impact on farmers, and in certain categories, I think soy specifically, there have been some significant impacts to farmers due to trade. But if you look at grain shipments, I mean, I think the largest grain shipments we'll hear from Bill later today is like 1993. It's absolutely astounding. What we're seeing in the railroads.
Well, I know it's going to be a bumper year for corn as well, with all the rains throughout the Midwest, the Southeast, Upper Midwest. There's some farming in my background, not first generation anymore, but I've always had a soft spot for the farmers.
So what do you think on the corn? Is a lot of rain good or bad for corn?
A lot of rain, it's going to be a bumper year for the corn
crop. It's good.
crop.
When you say bumper, for those that aren't farmers. Okay, good. I'm not a farmer. I don't play one on TV. I talk freight. So we're talking about a good year for farmers. For exports. So does that...
Not a good year for cattle, though.
Not a good year for cattle.
No.
But it hasn't been a good year for cattle for many years, right?
Yeah, the facilities are closing.
And I'm only talking about corn. You mentioned grain.
Because of rain,
But what is the deal with I mean, I know Kevin Martin is a cow farmer. He runs a hobby farm.
No, we should have him come and talk about it.
We should talk about it.
Tyson is closing 2 facilities because of cattle
Was
shortages.
it disease or something with the cows? Something I read about this a while ago.
There's a cattle shortage. That's all I know.
There's a cattle
I don't know
shortage.
why.
And then beef prices, the beef consumption.
They're closing their
GLP-1s,
facilities
by the way, are
in
driving
Illinois and Utah to keep
protein,
it in the middle of the country.
Because beef has such a high concentration of protein. It's one of the most protein efficient foods you can eat. Is that there's a big level of demand for beef.
Well, although I think if we look at more of the recent numbers, because of the affordability issue with inflation and that, chicken has had better momentum in the last year or more. I don't get down to that level with beef versus chicken, but I know the public chicken companies have had pretty good public or volumes to report. I don't know about their profits.
Yeah.
So Thom, let's talk about the current environment in trucking.
Yeah.
You guys at Reliance see, the renewals are happening. One of the things that we have been talking, and even maybe debating is the right term, is this view about whether or not when are we gonna see the cycle correct? So I think you would agree with this, is that we're clearly in a upswing in the market. There is some momentum in the freight market. You could argue it's capacity driven, but regardless, carriers are gaining pricing power. How long does this cycle go from your perspective?
Well, so I look at it 2 ways, Craig. There have been sort of 5 big events that have impacted supply. So we know about the ELP or English language proficiency, the non-domiciled situation. We've had an announcement, no more self-certification around the CDL institutions, and then a move away eventually from self-certification with ELD. So that's 4. And then there's the Montgomery SCOTUS and all the fallout, the recent big C.H. Robinson verdict, et cetera. If all of the regulatory progress stopped with those 5 things, and a lot of things that are being discussed don't come to fruition, then the cycle will be over by the end of next year or Q1 of 28. But if some of these other things are enacted, then that's
normal. You're following the normal cycle. It's interesting. We've had Ken Adamo. We've had Dr. Jason Miller on. We've had one of the great things I love about the show is just how the differing perspectives. And one of the things that I think Ken Adamo would argue, formerly with DAT, is that the government, because of pressure on shippers, is going to loosen. That's his case. It's like there's too much pressure in the market. Something has to give. Now, Jason Miller has argued that there is actually, which is interesting because I think his position shifted on this, is there's more demand than people realize, which is an interesting sort of take. But he thinks that the market will correct because the larger fleets will come in over correct capacity.
Well, so there's 2 angles there. Number one is if the government does do more, like, for example, reform what it takes to get a CDL, or they raise the insurance minimum, they raise the freight broker bonding requirement, they do any number of things. Like, I think there's a discussion to have a national clearinghouse for VIN numbers. That's been part of the problem around, theft, fraud, non-compliance, et cetera. And I've got other ideas that we've certainly shared with the government. But if those things happen, then I think the odds of us having more than a 2-year cycle increase dramatically. But back to, I listened to your conversation with Ken, and I have a lot of respect for him. I'd be very surprised if they could convince the government to come up with some relief valves. If it took this long to get enhanced enforcement around non-compliant carriers, unsafe practices, that's something that's more bipartisan than favoring, the shipper community.
I don't think the shipper community, has any juice.
I don't think they do.
And look, you talk to a lot of
I think to your point, I don't know they care. Target reported their earnings this morning. Broad consumer sentiment really seemed to be standing up, that overall and a huge increase in same-day deliveries. So people are still paying for that convenience, which would be one of the first things you pull back on when we're talking about demand, but not once did they mention transportation costs.
I don't think it's a big deal.
Or shipping, it's not on their mind.
It's on our minds, but as we've learned talking to, we sell typically to large enterprises, is who buys sonar. And what's interesting about it is it's not as much of a priority as we would like it to be. Like we wish they were like all in on saving money on on freight, but that isn't, it is not. And you talk to the CFOs of these companies and they will tell you that of all the things that they have to do, transportation's pretty low on the list. It's one of those things, it gets stuck with procurement. And while we would wish that they would prioritize it, when you talk to them, it is lower on the list than we would like. And I think that means, I mean, theft, retail theft is much bigger. If you talk to the retailers, this is much bigger. And Corco, we can't get a bill through Congress. And so I don't think, look, the FMCSA will tell you straight up that they do not regulate anybody but motor carriers. That is they will say, we don't even regulate brokers. They're the technically the ones that issue it, but well, that's beside the point. But they will say that their role is to regulate the motor carriers. And so, as the motor carrier authority, they want to do everything they can to manage the motor carriers. And that is their single charter. And so when you think about it from the perspective of what would really drive change in sort of a change in perspective, you would have to have somebody moving Congress to really shift the focus back towards the shippers. And I don't think the shippers, even if they wanted the juice, have the juice, I don't think they care about it. And I think the ones that the big companies that have the juice are focused on so many other things.
I think they're
tariffs are far more important. Some of the tax bills are more important. Some of the incentives are more important. And I will learn. I mean, look, we talk about this often. I don't think any CEO is brave enough, or maybe stupid enough, depending on your perspective, to go against the administration.
Right.
Because you've learned that this administration, for better or worse, will punish you as a business. They are somewhat ruthless, and they're holding CEOs in check. Now, there are a lot of people who have problems with that, and it's fair. But I don't think this whole idea that the businesses are going to come and force the government to stop doing immigration and regulation. The other thing here, Tom, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is if you look at throughout history, anytime you see an industry go from a deregulated market to shift, and you worked on Wall Street, and you know how, I use that as a great example, is Wall Street went from a very deregulated market to all of a sudden lots of regulations.
Big time.
And it's continued to shift that way. Maybe now the pendulum is shifting a little bit back, but there was 15 years of more and more and more
regulation? Well, that's what made it a lot less fun. So it started in 2003 with the Elliott Spitzer reforms. Actually, that made me a better analyst because public companies at that point couldn't talk freely.
And that was post-Enron.
It was. Yeah. It was one of the aftermaths and the concerns about insider trading and all that.
Is that where Reg FD came about?
Yes, exactly.
So that was 2003.
So I had to develop a network of private motor carriers, and that's where really I began to develop relationships with shippers, which served me well when I went to Celadon. It still serves me well with our conference last month. You know, we had like 12 shippers come to our event, including 5 on a big panel, which makes Reliance a little bit different as an insurance agency to get trucking customers to our event. But yeah, it became a very different world, and I could go on and on with a lot of stories. Let's keep it to trucking currently, though.
But the idea that you're going to have a deregulated market, you're going to see
you're going to see hands off, and then you're going to see a need for some reform later on. And maybe that's where trucking is today. I don't think anybody wants to re-regulate the pricing in the lane from Dallas to Chicago.
No one's going to do that.
But safety is paramount. That was never deregulated. If anything, the government doesn't really know how to regulate that aspect. I'm very grateful for Derek Bars and the team behind him really putting an emphasis on the S word again, safety.
Yep, and they certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, and so speaking of that in FMCSA, and you've mentioned that you have ideas and that you have brought them forth to the government with. You've got till what, July 29? I mean, January
20th, yep.
And what would be your top things that you would like to see get done?
Well, so there was the announcement about the elimination of self-certification of ELDs, but there really hasn't been any teeth put into that. So that's got to be one of the things. And I don't know if our audience understands how dramatic the change will happen. So there's 1,000 ELDs, give or take a dozen, right now. Right in Canada, there's 41. One of the companies is based in Grand Caymans. The other 20 are based in Canada. Those 20 are not going to come into the United States market. So then there's 20 U.S. ELD companies that also serve Canada. So we're going to go from 1,000 ELDs to 20
but
or
you don't
less.
So Geotab is based there. It's the largest.
Oh yeah,
they're okay, right?
They're okay. Samsara, all the big names.
Well, Samsara is based in the U.S., but
well, I didn't
Geotab
realize
is based in Canada.
Geotab. They got a ton of U.S. customers as is.
Got it.
What I should have said is many of those 20.
There's also Fleet Complete that's up there. So.
Yeah, but we'll end up with a much smaller base.
For sure, as we should. I mean, it's ridiculous that you could create a back door and get shut down and then just
well, the certification process is there's over 500 things that are looked at per ELD to be compliant in Canada. Now, whether that'll be exactly what happens in the U.S., I don't know, but it will be a dramatic change. We know a lot of people are still cheating. So that, to answer your question, they've got to put more teeth behind that. They've got to put more teeth behind the English language proficiency, fines to the driver, fines to the motor carrier, maybe the freight is possessed by the government. So I'm looking for more teeth. I'm looking for changes to the new entrant program, and there was recently a notice of proposed rulemaking. I'd love to see any new fleet have to undergo a questionnaire of maybe 100 questions or more before they can even get a DOT number. Yeah, things around maintenance, hours of service, driver skills, on and on. So I think there's more coming, which will give the opportunity, or give the opportunity, yes, to make this more than a traditional recovery of 18 to 20 months.
So it really boils down to enforcement.
Enforcement and more things being laid out on the table. But I'm confident there will be. It may not be everything that's on my wish list, but for example, what if the cost of a new DOT number, instead of being $300 or so, becomes $5,000 to $10,000? We're not going to see people cobble together DOT numbers today the way they do.
Because there's a value to it. I've argued that, and again, this is a hate message for this, but the government should restrict them.
Yeah.
Like at least short-term tax, they do the taxi medallions, all of a sudden those things become valuable. And you know why you do that? Is if something has value, you don't destroy it.
Correct.
And that is why I've argued they should cap it. Like we have what? How many registered DOT numbers are there? 800,000?
I look at the annual number. Last year it was about 60,000 brand new DOT numbers.
In total.
That sounds about right. I don't know.
I think there's 930,000 total when you include buses, but approximately in motor and for-hire motor carriers, like 800,000. And if you cap that number and wouldn't issue new ones, then you would have a secondary market where those numbers would go up, and you could do it in a 5-year period. But what you would have is if you're going to destroy something, if you're going to go out and have accidents and unsatisfactory ranking, that value of that registration is zero. Yeah. No one wants it.
Right.
That to me would be something. Again, I've been accused of being a communist for that. I'm still a free market capitalist. I actually think you're letting the market set the price. And if you have it, you're going to hang on to it. People take care of things that have value. And if it has no value, like these DOT registrations, you're just going to destroy the damn thing. And that's exactly what's happening. We have so much to talk about, Tom. Are you going to be around for a bit?
I'll be around for a little bit longer.
Why don't you stick with us? We're going to get to the sonar update, and we're going to have Tom participate with that.
Oh, boy.
I got to ask Tom about insurance, because this is something in a post-Montgomery world. We're going to get into that right after these messages. We'll be with you.
The drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and crews who keep the world moving deserve tools that work as hard as they do. That's what Samsara builds, technology for safer, more efficient operations, made with the people who do the work. Samsara, built with operators for operators. Learn more at samsara.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. Julie, right on the board, let's talk about rejection rates. 13.46, not a lot of change, a little bit up today. Really, this is a sign, we've talked about this, we're middle of August, almost headed towards the college football season, kicks off. We're going to be at the College Football Hall of Fame, cannot wait. That will be live tomorrow, tune in. We've got guests from it that live in Atlanta and work in Atlanta, hot Atlanta, are going to be there.
Yeah.
So
rejection rates pretty much staying stable where they are. Again,
so the weather's mild. We're here to tell you when it's not.
volumes, though, are leveling out.
But volumes are
They're not
stabilizing,
falling.
which is really a sign of things to come. But let's bring Thom Albrecht in. Thom, let's talk a little bit about everything you're seeing. So rejection rates are, they're stable, we'll call them. They're not increasing. I think the question that on everyone's mind is, what does the second half as we go deeper into the year look like?
I feel like it's going to be a very good year for trucking. So first of all, any slowdown in the second half of July and throughout August, that's as normal as snow in Minnesota in the wintertime. And so I don't really get moved too much by the tender rejection declining a little bit in the summer months. We may not see a real spark until October. So it's going to be a good finish to the year, though.
Yeah, so you really think that we're going to see is a pretty significant sort of change to the year. We've questioned about whether we have a big peak.
I do. I think it's going to be a good year for carriers as they, second half of the year, as they talk about their volumes, continued progress in pricing, et cetera. So
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now in terms of, there's a lot of noise around the insurance business. Brokers are now subject to sort of looking a lot like motor carriers in terms of risk.
yes.
What are you guys seeing? What is the insurance carriers telling you guys about insurance rates?
Well, the number one thing, the word to use is it's a total frenzy right now. So there's been 3 stages since Montgomery SCOTUS on May 14th. The first was total chaos. So any broker that renewed in May or early June was just had, it was Murphy's Law all the way. Secondly was the market kind of calmed down in June a little bit and until July 23rd when the big C.H. Robinson verdict came out. I was talking to my CEO today. We've seen 2 underwriters exit the market, basically backing the paper over in London. So there's going to be fewer options, a very inflationary environment, and there's going to be more questions that are asked of freight brokers than ever before as they go through their renewals.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what, in terms of cost increases, you guys are projecting for brokers.
Well, we're hesitant to use specific numbers, but so for primary coverage, which for many freight brokers is the first $5 million of what we call FBAL, freight broker auto liability, we're seeing double digit. And when I say double digit, I don't mean close to 10 or 11, but I don't mean 90 or 95% either, kind of in the middle digits
percentage
there.
Increase, so if say that it was 1% of revenues or gross bookings, it would be 1.3%. Is that the way to think of it? Or 1.5?
No. Well, that's for the primary. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Okay.
And then the excess or surplus coverage, which typically for the larger brokers is above $5 million, that's going to be 50, 60% to, triple-digit increases. So, and then a lot of small brokers, let's say a small broker, gross revenues were 30, 40 million. They might have been paying $10,000 a year. They're going to be looking at 30 or 40,000.
So it's going to be, they're going to fill it in terms of increase. One of the things that there's this interesting debate. We had Drew Wilkerson from RXO on air a couple of days ago. He pointed out that it's just RXO and C.H. Robinson. He said another carrier, we know it's C.H. Robinson, that had over $100 million of excess liability coverage. C.H. Robinson, because we know this, was $135 million. This big lupus sort of brought all that out. RXO has said that they're the only other broker that has that level of coverage. It's interesting because I've talked to some big brokers that said they're reducing their excess liability because they think they're a target. I don't know. What is the right answer?
Well, it's not even so much that they may think they're a target, but also the underwriting appetite is not there. So let's say someone had 20 million and they wanted 50 million post these recent decisions. They're not going to have that kind of capacity. Now, we did have one of our larger customers that, I forget the exact numbers, I think they had 20 million and they cut it to 15. And then they were able to go back into the market after the recent big verdict and secure some extra coverage.
But how much more increase in cost?
I forgot if they ended up at 40 or $50 million, which is pretty sizable.
But is it an increase in cost?
It's a substantial increase that, due to the nature of our customer relationship, we can't share.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was way more than they would have ever envisioned 4 or 5 months ago.
And so what is it? Would you describe the current situation with brokers? Panic, confusion?
Well, I think there's a couple things to think about. Number one is the underwriters, they don't know how hot the book is that they're sitting on. So in other words,
when you say don't know how?
Well, that's a term in the underwriting community, but it means that they're going to be looking at losses. Yeah. So they know the books are going to be explosive. They know there's going to be a lot more adverse verdicts that come out over the next couple of years. And so they're having to reprice all that as they go through the renewals.
Now, if I have an insurance policy that say a couple of years ago, and I cancel my insurance or I move to a different carrier, does the insurance that I had a couple of years ago, if I was at the time insured, protect me at that moment for that thing that happened?
So like if a new case, if you get pulled into a new case that happened, for an event that happened 2 or 3 years ago.
That generally stays with the prior underwriter.
Got it. Okay.
Again, that could be rewritten in the new world, but but I want to make a couple other points. So there are some underwriters that do both auto liability and cargo, and those underwriters are the ones that are actually giving larger rate increases because the cargo book has been hot with all of the theft and fraud trends. So they are that used to be a no-brainer to make money, cargo insurance. But if you're getting your coverage for cargo and auto liability as a freight broker from them, from the same institution, you might want to think about breaking that up a little bit. I mean, that's why you hire agents. You know, it's their job to shop around, find the most appropriate risk solution. So there's a lot at work. It's highly inflationary. Nobody knows exactly what they're sitting on at this time.
You told me something off air that I want to. So this Lupus Superior nuclear lawsuit, the largest operating nuclear lawsuit in trucking history, because it was a company out of Florida that John King's reported. It's a $900 million judgment, but the carriers didn't even show up to the case. So largest, at least according to our data, nuclear verdict in history. There was something in terms of the plaintiff's attorneys showed.
Well, so there's a couple things with C.H. Robinson that I've not seen reported. I talked to an attorney who had gone through the transcript, and apparently in the C.H. Robinson case, there was video of one of the people who died with their vehicle on fire. And the jury was allowed to see that.
Trapped in the vehicle.
Trapped in the vehicle. That probably
was this the same case? This was so they were able to see there was video taken of someone dying.
That's what an attorney told me. Secondly, there was a webinar I listened in last week on. It's going to be interesting to see what C.H. Robinson's appeal is like, but apparently that driver had disabled the camera and the GPS. Now, I don't know what other visibility CH may have had through Navisphere. There's a lot of things.
How would CH have known that, though?
I don't know.
Lupus would have known.
But none of these things were reported early on.
Yeah, there's still a lot of things. I was, as we've talked about on air a couple of weeks ago, someone who was in the case told me that the argument, because this whole thing about whether the driver was an employee, he was an employee of Lupus Superior, but he wasn't an employee of C.H. Robinson, at least in the traditional definition. However, the jury ruled that he was. He was a borrowed employee. What he said was the fact that C.H. Robinson, the driver had downloaded the app, and because C.H. Robinson, he had the C.H. Robinson app or access to it, made him a borrowed employee during that moment in time. And I thought that was...
Because they had access to his phone to track his movement.
Correct. And that was one of the really interesting takes. I have my own issues with that because, as I described on air, it felt like my DoorDash delivery dude who delivered my burrito was my employee at that moment. Yeah. Which I would have fired him because he was slow as hell getting my burrito there. But my point is, it feels like if that's the case, then if I'm a broker, I'm reevaluating using my own technology. I want as much degree removed as possible, do I not?
Probably, but I think that aspect has a pretty decent chance in appeal. Yeah. I think what every broker's shooting for are three things. They want to have consistent processes. Are those processes auditable? And then are they defensible? That's the goal everybody's looking for. Through whatever processes they are, whatever data they're combining in, whether it's FMCSA data or other things, that CAD is the acronym: consistent, auditable, and defensible.
Yeah, so great. So much to unpack with Thom. I mean, Thom, last thoughts on cycle.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is going to go on for a long time, or? Well,
again, it all depends on if there's additional enforcement.
I do. I mean, why wouldn't there be?
Well, I believe there will be. So then you get back to the definition of a super cycle. For me, a super cycle is longer than 2 years because the last 5 recoveries have all been between 18 and 24 months. So just to get beyond 2 years is pretty significant for this industry.
But I would say yesterday we had the chief strategy officer of RXO on. Yeah. He believes that we're talking about a 20 to 25% reduction of capacity per year, which would be a massive washout. Because that is much more significant than we've even seen.
Right. Well, I think we're all going to be looking to see what notice of proposed rulemakings are put forth over the next 3 to 6 months by the FMCSA. The new entrant one recently came out. That's really fascinating. If we have a national database for VIN numbers, just like we've got the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, I mean, that's a great idea. I know there's some discussions around insurance minimums. One of the suggestions that we gave is the states need to be audited for their CDL issuance every 2nd or 3rd year. And that had not been presented to the FMCSA. I don't know whether they're going to do it, but if you did every 3 years, that means 16 to 17 states are being audited for their CDL issuance over the previous 2 to 3 years. If you did it every 2 years, obviously half the states get audited. But right now, DOT went through a lot of things, but that was kind of a one-time thing. The states need to have a regular cadence in conjunction with the FMCSA.
Yeah, but there's this whole federal state.
Oh, yeah.
Red versus blue state. It's all very.
Again, safety should not be a blue, red, left, right, Republican, Democrat.
I agree. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, which is not viewed as a sort of center left. I mean, it is a center left paper. I wrote an argument that we need better truck safety and the issues. And I got to tell you, the comments, they closed them out after 1,100 comments.
Oh, wow.
But it was all very supportive.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I was talking about how the DOT under Sean Duffy has done a great job. And because it was all centered on safety and truck safety, there was an enormous amount of support. I think everyone's going to support that.
Who could not support anything that they feel like would actually create safer roads? Drivers are going to want safer roads. They want higher standards so that the other drivers on the roads are meeting the same standards they are. Carriers want everyone to play by the same rules unless you aren't playing by the rules, right? The general public is going. They want to be safe on the roads.
OIDA, ATA, TCA, national private truck carriers. You go through the list. Plus, you get the insurance companies. You get the road advocates. You get all of the safety advocates. You get all of the parties that want it. And parties that don't want it don't have the power or the juice. You get to these political arguments that seem to happen. But I would say the states and the federal government and the insurance companies and the shippers, and now the brokers, they all have a job. And we've seen the Supreme Court, I think, surprise a lot of people in our industry that they argued safety first in their decision on Montgomery.
Correct.
And I think when we go through this, that's going to be a consistent thing that happens. Even the liberal and conservative judges chose to put safety into the conversation versus a lot of the other things.
Well, so here's another potential reform. What about the CDL issuance? The ATA historically resisted any minimum number of hours behind the wheel, arguing that their fleets, their members, had good programs. Well, that may be true, but the problem is that we now know there were all these
the
carriers
ATA,
that came in.
Talked about
I don't want to.
They deserve to be called out.
And I'm not going to do that on the air here.
I will do it because it's ridiculous that they created a deregulation market and lowered the barriers to entry, thinking that they would capture a lot of those drivers to the bigger fleets. That was the goal. And I don't think that's disputed. They were very, in fact, if you go look at the conversation around the entry-level driver training program, they fought against minimum hours. I'm a pilot. I have to do 40 hours in an airplane. I have to complete a bunch of tasks. The ATA is wrong on that issue. However, I think they've also been bitten. I think they now realize, and as you know, Tom, I know it, Julie knows it, our audience knows it, so a massive shift away from driver shortage to we need the right kinds of drivers.
100%.
So I think that's all positive.
It is, and so I was talking to Kelly, who cuts my hair. She had 1,600 hours she had to go through before she got a license to be a haircut.
Those scissors. I haven't done it. I don't even know what a haircut is these days. I just take a razor, but those scissors can hurt.
Her job's getting easier with me the older I get, but you think about that, and there's so many professions where the minimum hours, why wouldn't we have I'm just spitballing, 160 hours behind the wheel.
80,000 pounds.
Don't you have to have minimum?
No, there's no federal standard.
For a regular driver's license. And maybe it's different by states, but I had to have.
They have guidelines.
Yeah.
When you walk into the DMV, you just have to prove that you've completed.
I think it's different. Maybe it's different by state or by age. I had to have X number of driving and to have gone to driver's ed and do all of those things.
Tennessee is a little bit more.
So maybe it's different state by state.
That's definitely a state thing, but again, there's been resistance historically to that.
The ATA was against it. They argued during the whole entry-level driver training program decisioning that came out against mandatory minimums because they thought that the carriers that were members, that would be onerous for them, and they wanted to be able to put more drivers in the state. And the problem is that it wasn't the ATA members that were exploiting it. It's all the guys that aren't members that are exploiting it. And that's where I think follow the money. The big monies for more enforcement, the big monies realized how disastrous the safety, security, and more importantly, the economics of our industry is when we have no barriers to entry. We need them.
So all of that goes back to the importance of, I don't see how rates can fall.
Rates are going up.
Right, so spot rates are going to keep going up.
And yes, freight rates are definitely going up.
Spot rates are going to keep going up. We've got less than 66 cents between spot and contract, and when you add fuel into that, contract rates are starting to come up to the spot.
We've talked about this. The DOT is monitoring the freight rates, and they will tell you, just like they do with the railroads, they believe strong economics is a safety issue because it means that the carriers that make money, if they make a profit, they will be able to make the investments they need to be safe. And that is what this is all about. We'll be right back with Bloomberg's Lee Klaskow. Stay with us.
In freight, again, your customer experience is everything. Every quote, order, and status update is a chance to win or lose a customer, but that will still, again, run on manual disconnected systems. Pallet is the leading enterprise AI built for the supply chain, automating costly operations from code to cash across brokerages, carriers, forwarders, shippers, and warehouses. Mallory Alexander serves 3 times more customers per operator, deliver an exceptional customer experience at scale. Visit them right now at pallet.com.
Doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We're still keeping Thom Albrecht because he's such a great resource, but we have Lee Klaskow. Lee, how are you today? He's the Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Transportation Analyst.
Me.
Sorry, Lee, do we have audio?
I hope so.
Oh,
Yeah, we do now.
Hear me
So we
now.
got you.
Okay.
So, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. I was having some VPN issues, so I'm on my phone right now. So I apologize for the budget looking setup here, but it's great to be here with you.
You
guys
look
again.
like our own John Kingston, so we'll keep it. We'll keep it. You guys are great. So, Lee, let's talk a little bit about the cycle. Just general thoughts. I mean, we've been through earnings season. Any sort of takeaways from that?
I mean, I think that it's going to be higher for longer. I heard part of your conversation earlier about, is this a super cycle? I think given the structural changes in the supply, I do think that we are going to be in more of a super cycle, and that's great for trucking, and it's great for the overall economy because it provides, the stability. You were mentioning earlier in your previous conversations about, the importance of not only access to capacity, but access to the right capacity, and that right capacity needs to be safe. And if shippers really got to enjoy very low rates for a long time, and really those were rates that were just they couldn't be sustained because companies were not making money. Many companies, as you know, had to shut their doors. You guys do a lot of reporting on bankruptcies within the trucking industry, and a lot of mid-sized truckers that I've talked to through my channel checks have indicated that thank God that it turned when it turned, because they were mortgaging their house, they were bootstrapping their own companies because all of the savings that they made during the pandemic has totally run out.
So, Lee, we've been talking to a number of guests, and there's a question about the cycle. I think a lot of it comes back to how strong is the regulatory enforcement. I've argued, and again, there's a difference of opinion on this, I'd love to get your take, is that the shippers just don't have the juice nor care about freight rates to the degree that the industry cares about it. You care about it, I care about it, because we do this every day. We're in it, this is our whole business. But if you're a shipper, if you're a major manufacturer, if you're a retailer, you have so many other things top of mind that you want to deal with when it comes to government regulation, but you simply don't have the juice. The transportation department doesn't have the juice to actually change the rules, and therefore there is no pressure that's going to be put on to relieve this regulatory movement. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I mean, I think it's here to stay. I really do think that, the benefits that the current administration is getting are not going to be reversed, because I think that a lot of folks, when looking back in the rearview mirror, think that the lax rules that they had before just didn't work. And I think a lot of folks in and out of the industry didn't realize how corrupt some of the bad players were, whether it's, when ELDs came, most people thought, oh, this is great. Everyone's going to be on a level playing field. People won't have 5 sets of books anymore. But, someone's just calling an Eastern European hacker and getting into your ELD and kind of rolling back your hours. So it's almost easier to change things. So, I might get some flack, but, having more regulation is actually a better thing for the trucking industry. I'm not saying we're going to go back to the days of the industry being fully regulated, but having some sort of a floor for a rate isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're looking at a lot of these trucking companies. As all of you know, during good times it's razor thin margins, right? You're making mid-single digit EBIT margins, which is nothing great. Obviously, the large publicly traded guys can do a lot better, but they have the scale.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go.
Well, it harkens me back to a statement, Craig and Julie, I'm sure you both have heard. Traffic managers, shippers, they don't get fired for missing their budget. They get fired when goods are not on the shelves and sales can't occur.
And potentially now liability issues. Yeah. If they make we saw cases in Texas, now it got thrown out by the Texas Supreme Court, but Home Depot got drug into a case.
Well, that's an interesting one. Is there such a thing as a passive shipper, given all the requirements that they have with carriers and freight brokers and all that? I think that's just a question of the right state.
Do you think it's a matter of when before we start to see shippers actually get drug into the courtroom? Give me some reason for that.
Well, so they dictate insurance minimums. They do incredible vetting on the overall corporation. They dictate the pickup and delivery schedules. They do awards. They do compliance. Some of the shippers have licenses as brokers and motor carriers as well. That doesn't sound passive to me.
What do you think, Lee? You think we're going to see a period where shippers are being brought into this? Are they thinking about it?
I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. I'm not ready to use a broad brush here. You're hiring a trucking company, and there's so much vetting that you can do, and accidents do happen. And if you're doing all the right things, it's hard to see that the shipper would be liable. But
plaintiffs' attorneys have different ideas, though.
Well, I don't disagree with what you're saying in spirit, Lee. I'm just saying the right state, the right plaintiff attorneys, they're going to exploit that language of passive shipper.
Yeah, for sure. So, Lee, C.H. Robinson's stock is an interesting one because obviously there's a giant target on C.H. Robinson right now. The two biggest cases that we've had in our industry, one being the Montgomery and the other being this lupus superior, involve C.H. Robinson. So what is your thoughts as you sort of watching the stock and reporting on this industry? What are your thoughts on where does C.H. Robinson, how are investors reacting to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously last year the C.H. Robinson stock was up. Was probably one of the group leaders. This year it's one of the laggards. It's one of the few stocks that are down year to date. The industry, broadly speaking, is up like around 25% versus the S&P, which is up around 13%. So transportation in general has definitely outperformed. I think some of that declines is really driven by maybe some overzealous investors excited about the AI opportunities at C.H. Robinson, and then all of a sudden this Montgomery ruling, which people are trying to figure out the true impact. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but it seems like they have a pretty good case at an appeal going forward. So while the Montgomery case was a very interesting one, it'll be interesting to see with some of these large findings come out, large fines come out, whether if they can appeal them.
Yeah. So I think we all agree. Great market condition right now. Certainly going to last through the rest of this year, maybe through the rest of next year, depending on who we're talking to. But I want to talk a little bit about ocean, not just trucking, and what you're seeing there regarding current earnings and the current situation around rates increasing so much.
Yeah, the liner market industry has been on fire. I guess kind of no pun intended, but a lot of that has to do with capacity. Capacity has been sucked up because of all the dislocations created around the world, whether that's through the Suez Canal or more recently the Strait of Hormuz. As ships are kind of avoiding those areas, that is increasing the voyages and eating up excess capacity. Maersk reported a couple weeks ago, they announced that they were going to increase, or they announced they increased their EBIT or operating income guidance pretty high to 4.5 to 6.5 billion from 2 to 4 billion. So that's a pretty move up, and that's really being driven by decent demand out of Asia, more specifically China, and the strong rates that we see. And the most interesting thing that came, at least from our vantage point, was that they're saying that about a third of their ships are going back through the Suez, which as an insurer, I don't know how comfortable I would be with that, just given the fact that if the U.S. is still at war with Iran, some of their proxies like the Houthis can target container ships, which tend to have very high value cargo on board.
So I'd love to get Lee. Obviously, the Suez and Hormuz are major issues. We've seen so much noise around that. Do we think that the ship lines, we talked about this yesterday, that a lot of this is not demand driven, but really just some level of market exploitation by the large ship liners, but also them pulling capacity out. But I think we've heard on some of the public earnings is that there is still a capacity build happening in international ocean freight. Any thoughts on really whether they are able to maintain pricing power?
Oh yeah, I mean they are. It's kind of a boom and bust cycle, kind of like the trucking industry has been. I would actually say the liner market tends to be a little less rational than truckers, because when truckers, they're not usually rushing to maybe grow their fleets. A lot of publicly traded guys would rather lean on the owner operators to get that additional capacity. Some liners are just trying to be the biggest. Maersk, which we talked about earlier, has kind of downshifted that approach, and they want to be a little little more profitable, a little more integrated, as opposed to just being the biggest. And if you took away all of the dislocations that we spoke about, supply would definitely be outpacing demand almost by a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of growth. So that would obviously weigh severely on rates. One of the other good things that are happening within the global shipping markets is that there's a congestion at a lot of ports, and some of that has to do with the dislocations that have created. There's like a 12-day backup in China, and so that is also weighing on rates, meaning that pushing rates higher for the liners, and that's really been driving some of that robust earnings that we discussed earlier.
So Lee, you're saying that if they weren't pulling blank sailings, ship capacity off the market or slow selling, and there wasn't this port congestion, we would be seeing much lower container rates. Is that the takeaway?
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's interesting.
Yeah,
go ahead.
If some of you guys, everyone's age, you remember the Wayne's World movie, the scene where it's like game on, game off. If the game's on in the Suez Canal for a long period of time, that's going to do a lot to bring a lot of that capacity back on, because ships are, instead of taking 12 days to go around Africa, they're just going to go right from Asia to Europe, and that's going to create a lot of slack capacity in the market.
No crisis left untouched by the international ship lines. I want to talk a little bit about the railroads, because this is obviously Railroad Day. It's Wednesday, Railroad Day. Intermodal, J.B. Hunt murdered it based on intermodal traffic. One of the interesting takeaways from that was that we saw a shift from sort of that West Coast to East Coast intermodal traffic, where it's now this eastern part of the United States is benefiting. Feels like shippers are taking advantage of that 34% lower rates in intermodal. Do you think that's sustainable through peak?
Yeah, I mean, what's driving that is everything that we've been talking about, right? It's about tighter trucking conditions that are pushing up rates. You have higher diesel prices, which makes that dollar discount more attractive to shippers, and so they're a lot more willing to test the waters, if you will, or just outright start using intermodal. Not every shipper is going to use intermodal. Sometimes it just doesn't work because of the length of haul or maybe what they're shipping. But you do have that group of shippers that will go back and forth depending on where rates are and where service are, and the rails are doing a decent job with service, and then you have higher diesel prices, higher truckload rates, and so even though intermodal rates have gone up, that dollar discount, like I mentioned, is a lot more compelling for them to make the switch. I think that what you're seeing is that domestic, to your point, the domestic growth is really outpacing what we're seeing on the international side. The international side might get a little lumpy from some difficult comparisons, as a lot of shippers pulled some freight forward ahead of the peak season to make sure, to Tom's point, that those shelves are going to be filled during Christmas time.
Yeah, LTL is also the operating leverage that we're seeing with the LTL carriers. I mean, Old Dominion getting down to a 70 OR, pretty remarkable. It feels like a railroad these days. XPO at an 80, we've talked about that. Even ArcBest, which is an unionized LTL carrier, at a 90. Like these are really significant improvements. Lee, do you think there's additional operating improvements and operating leverage available for the LTL carriers?
Yeah, I think each carrier has their own little stories. Some have singles, some have doubles, if you will, in terms of improvements. I don't think anyone out there really has the ability to hit a home run or a grand slam. I think it's really singles and doubles, and those singles and doubles in a good environment. The most exciting thing from an analyst standpoint on the LTL side is that their pricing is fantastic, right? You're getting mid-single digit rate increases. That's been our long-term thesis on the industry, and that's why we've always preferred the LTL industry over the truckload industry through the cycle, especially when things are down. I mean, LTL demand, it hasn't been great, even though the ISM has been in positive territory this year, every month through July. Usually that's a precursor to an increase in LTL demand. We have seen weight per shipments moving up for a lot of these carriers, which is also kind of a precursor to maybe an increase in demand. So the picture is definitely improving. The industrial economy is improving. The consumer seems to be relatively resilient. That K-shaped economy, that lower end maybe, it's not going down as much. Maybe it's more or less flattening out, if you will, in terms of the growth. But the upper end of the consumer still is doing pretty strong. So that coupled with mid-single digit pricing, and for an LTL carrier, they're very highly leveraged to pricing. Usually at a rate around 3 to 1. That's kind of the rule of thumb that we use over tonnage. So we'd much rather see pricing continue to increase, and you couple that with hopefully they'll start getting some growth here later on this year. That should make things really compelling and drive those margins or those operating ratios even lower.
Lee, your senior U.S. economist retweeted, it was something about a week ago that I had posted about what we're seeing in the freight data, stronger conditions, stronger economy. Is that something that you agree with in terms of just the fact the economy is ramping? This is really driving the freight market in some ways?
Well, like I earlier said, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. I can say the same thing about as an economist. But what we are seeing, is really an industrial economy that's improving because of the AI build out with these huge data centers. You're seeing a lot of growth and everything that supports that. The consumer in a high interest in what's probably going to be a higher interest environment, are beginning to struggle. You're seeing that in various sentiment indicators, which are trending lower. But like I was mentioning earlier, there's a K-shaped economy. There's a group of folks that are doing just fine. That $4.50 gas doesn't really bother them that much. Where there's a whole other group where that takes away from spending of other things, which, if you're buying less things are usually, delivered on a truck. So you want people to be buying more things, not less things.
So I sold a house today. So it wasn't my home. It was a home that my son lived at with his mother. She's now remarried and had the chance to sell it. I was at the title company with the real estate agent who's been doing this for decades. He said this is the most, quote unquote, aggressive market in terms of buyers demanding incentives. So not necessarily rate incentives, but hey, when you're buying the house, he said there was a situation where we were selling a house for $400,000. The buyer wanted $50,000 in repairs. And he goes, that sounds like a lot. That is not unusual. He said, he goes, I've never seen it like this before, where these buyers are incredibly sensitive. Tom, thoughts on really the housing market, what this means for freight?
Well, housing's been stuck, but I agree that it is becoming a buyer's market for those demands. And if you're looking at, let's say, a brand new home, there are builders, because they've got excess supply, they're willing to buy down points to get that interest rate under 6%. So housing, everybody talks about how bad housing is. It's basically flattish. But the slightest uptick there, more patio furniture, more tiles, more carpeting, more this, more that, that would be fantastic in 2027.
We would love housing here in the freight market, Lee. I imagine you would love to see more housing activity, but the railroads are doing well. Even, some of the housing-related parts of the rail market seem to be doing okay versus truckload, which is a dog. I mean, flatbed, which is usually tied to housing, is on fire due to the AI construction build out and defense.
Plus energy. Yeah.
Energy is a good one too, yeah.
The ag market's been really strong. That's been a leader as well as metals. That's really been driving the growth that we've seen in the commodity carload sector of the rail industry this quarter and for the full year to date. That coupled with I think it's like 3% intermodal growth has done the rail guys pretty well this year.
All right, Lee, closing thoughts. Where would you put your money? I know you're not an investor, but who do you think is going to have the best end of the year earnings cycle in terms of improvements? Which part of the sector are you most bullish on?
Yeah, we don't do buy, hold, sell recommendations here at Bloomberg Intelligence, but I from an industry standpoint, I'm extremely bullish on the LTL space, followed by the truckload space. I think the rail space is going to be very interesting as it relates to the merger. They just got some good news yesterday that the STB is going to continue to resume the consideration of the merger of UP and NS. There were, that coupled with the concessions that were made by UP and the fact that Canadian National is no longer going to protest the deal. These are incremental positives for the deal. We still aren't thinking it's a slam dunk that the deal gets approved because there's a very high regulatory bar that has to pass. The STP passed tougher merger rules in 2001 and has to prove that the deal is in the public's best interest, and it also enhances competitions. And that's a pretty hard thing to do. I don't think it's impossible, but it'll be very interesting. It makes my job pretty interesting as well.
Well, there's no shortage of stories, no shortage of things to watch. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on FreightWaves today. We'll have to have you back. Real quick, Tom, any closing thoughts on intermodal or LTL? I mean, those seem like the hottest, sexiest sectors in our business right now. If you were an analyst, I know you've been one.
It's been 10 years.
Where would you put your money in terms of sector? Not specific stocks, but which parts of the sector would you invest in?
I don't disagree with Lee. I think the leverage in the LTL space is very compelling. The heavier shipments spilling over. To me, I just play it all the way across the board.
I mean, Saia had a really impressive earnings, but I think they got a little bit, they had the sort of same store sales problem because they built out 30 plus terminal locations. And I think Wall Street was, maybe had priced it a little differently.
And this is where I don't follow it as closely as I used to, Craig, but I think some of the stocks had paused, and it wasn't just Montgomery related. It was like they had their run. We don't know if we believe an extended cycle yet. I do believe all the elements are in place for this to last longer than 2 years. So there should be another leg up across the board.
I think Wall Street is waiting for tender rejections to go above 14.5%. We need to break 17%. We'll watch it. And that's, I think, maybe then it's all.
Watch that in the regulations.
Well, regulations are definitely going to be there, but people want to see the data. The high-frequency data, we have it here at FreightWaves on Sonar. You can get it at gosonar.com. We'll be right back with these after these messages.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business. the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me, and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited, and I hope to see you in class.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We're going to move on to the international ocean market and talk about international supply chains. We have our next guest, Oliver Sawbridge. He's a senior director at 0100. 0100 is essentially a peer networking group helping companies deal with AI disruptions and opportunities. Welcome into FreightWaves Today, Oliver.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be here. I saw the photo that you just uploaded. I was in a meeting before with a couple of colleagues, and they were like, "You need to get a new one of those." So first thing on the agenda, post this call.
Oliver, if you feel it makes you feel any better, I've lost about 50 pounds since my last headshot or a couple headshots ago, and Julie, yesterday we've got an event tomorrow, and I'm like, get rid of Fat Craig because he's fat. I look a lot younger, but I also look like a lot fatter. I also had a little bit more hair in those days. So anyways,
you still look sharp. You still look sharp.
Well, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what you guys do. You're helping companies deal with all these massive, navigating, no pun intended, supply chain changes. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you guys are focusing on and helping companies navigate.
Yeah, I like the pun there. So at 0100, it's like a peer connect group, and we talk to a lot of different customers within the industry and see how they're navigating these different challenges. I focus specifically on risk and resilience. So it's understanding how different companies are managing the disruptions that we're faced with today, and then applying our own, borrowing, learning from different industry peers, and then pulling in our own insights on top of that to help businesses understand how they can change and manage their supply chains and operations for this new world of seems like perennial disruption.
So what are you most closely watching right now regarding ongoing disruptions?
Yeah, I think it came up in the last call a bit, but two issues, out of the Gulf at the moment, and I think the Strait of Hormuz and the disruptions in the Red Sea, and watching this closely because what's interesting is that often when a choke point is disrupted, it quietly assumes that another one is still open, but at the moment we're getting a double whammy, and it's more than double the pain. So, trying to reroute around the Strait of Hormuz, you sort of feel like businesses can lean on the Red Sea, but both are disrupted, and that fallback sort of disappears. So the effects that we're seeing and hearing from businesses that they're compounding rather than just adding up.
So what kind of disruption do you think there would be if based on the Red Sea, if both of these choke points were truly closed? So not just the Strait of Hormuz, but then there's also not passage in the Red Sea. What would that look like from a true disruption standpoint?
I mean, massive. I mean, even now, I know there's still ships go through, but some analysts have talked about it. It's one of the biggest disruptions of all time, and even bigger than Russia, Ukraine, and COVID. And what that means is it's putting a lot of tension on other choke points, or other routes rather. And we're seeing this with the transiting around the Cape of Good Hope. So it's not just that's just not more days at sea, which is one cost, but it's roughly 3 weeks of additional travel time each way between Asia and Europe, which increases fuel consumption. Others that businesses are telling us is the impact on insurance, working capital tied up in cargo that's now weeks longer in transit, and the fact that alternative routes are already degrading. And so, for example, cargo insurance has jumped from 0.6 to as much as 2%, plus a war risk premium on top of that. So, and even the ports around the Cape, they've got record increases, so over 100% increases that they're seeing, which is significant in and of itself. But they don't have the infrastructure to be able to deliver the necessary services for that increased traffic throughout. And this infrastructure isn't just built in days, it's built in years, built through years. One food and drink company we're working with reported that, so it's not just the cost, but they reported to us that containers are not consistently landing at the intended ports that they're going to. So that's what I mean by, these alternative routes are sort of constantly degrading.
So what can shippers do? What are you advising those people to do to try to prepare for these disruptions? Inevitably, disruptions are things you can't necessarily anticipate, but how can people better prepare? What should shippers be looking at? How should they be hedging?
It's a great question, and I think so. I just did a bit of research for 0100 that's coming out shortly, and we're looking at the convergence of these megatrends, because I feel like if companies are sort of looking at specific events, then they're going to over-index on those type of things. And we saw this, even before the war in Iran kicked off, is that so many companies were being advised that the highest risk of disruption was going to happen in the South China Sea, and therefore weren't paying attention to what was happening in the Gulf. And so I think we need to pay attention to the forces that are impacting a lot of these disruptions. Two key ones, particularly in the shipping industry, being climate change and geopolitics, and therefore, that increases the probability of disruption on these particular choke points. More specifically to businesses, we're seeing many different strategies that businesses are adopting. For example, a logistics company we work with, they're not just waiting for normal flows to resume. They're building land bridge options. They're running through alternative ports. They're shifting cargo to different areas. Food and drink company that we're working with, like I was sort of talking about, they're sort of focused on crisis governance and business continuity and scenario planning. So there are multiple different options, but I think at 0100, what we do is we often see that these resilience plays through businesses are happening in siloed functions of the supply chain, be it logistics, be it sourcing, or what have you. And actually what we need to do to build that better resilience is connect across the supply chain to make sure that, we're building enterprise resilience rather than just supply chain functional resilience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another bad pun, have a war room around this topic with all of the stakeholders, right, involved in it. Do you think that these geopolitical disruptions are going to be something that just needs to be constant, ongoing part of planning going forward? Is this sort of the new normal? This is something that will need to be watched as closely as cost and efficiency?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely agree with that. And I think if you looked at how supply chains were built, during the period of relative stability over the past few decades, is that, the economic factors of supply chains, be it cost, availability, delivery, were paramount, right? And now, post-COVID, a lot of businesses were treating resilience as a sort of fourth variable. But I think what businesses need to do now is sort of think about resilience as the bedrock for those economic factors of supply chains, because if you don't have proper resilience, then your costs are going to be impacted, as we've seen through, the rerouting of supply chains around the Cape of Good Hope. Availability, like I was just talking about, that food and drinks company, the goods getting off at the wrong port, and delivery being the obvious one for the shipping industry. So I think we really need to focus on it there. And just bringing in sort of, the long-term aspect. So, disruptions are happening in the Gulf at the moment, and people are looking towards other ways to get their goods from Asia to Europe, for example. China's looking at, the northern sea route, particularly with the climate change, reducing the amount of ice and allowing that transit through there. But geopolitics is still going to be at play, right? Because, Russia's in control of the Bering Strait. So, there's a geopolitical aspect there. They also have, the most amount of icebreakers of any country in the world. So if a ship gets stuck during that passage, it's likely going to have to rely on Russia to help to break through that ice and free that ship. So there are geopolitical factors that come into even, alternative routes of ocean freight.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing differing routes than we've seen in the past around tariffs and trade changing as well, not just these geopolitical disruptions. So it's certainly something that's going to be interesting to continue watching. Any closing thoughts for our viewers on anything we didn't touch on?
No, I would just sort of go back to the point around the sort of siloed decision making. I mean, I just to go through a sort of company example. So within that Middle East disruption, their headline play was a resilience strategy around dual sourcing. So they used Altana to build that sort of sub-tier visibility and found this sort of around the 100 riskiest suppliers and sort of narrowed that exposure. I mean, this was a fantastic resilience play, right? Because you're adding other suppliers to your supply chain, and they're building in that resilience as a result. But what the problem was is it fixed, it looked at the supplier angle, i.e. the sourcing angle, and not the choke points. And what they found was that the visibility aimed at that supplier level, it never mapped the physical choke points that the supplier sat behind. And therefore they found that both of those suppliers, that they, the dual sourcing aspect, were both coming out of that same choke point, being the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. So it definitely needs to be a joined up process throughout the supply chain, and an integrated process for the business.
So coming back after these messages, appreciate Oliver. Thank you so much for coming in, talking to FreightWaves today. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're going to move from the international market to the domestic market. We're going to talk all about railroads. It is Wednesday. It is something you've been waiting for all week. It's Bill Stevens, and he's going to tell us what he's seeing on the trains.
In today's supply chain, every mile and every minute matters. Shippers, lessors, and railroads count on performance they can trust. That's where Trinity Rail delivers. With integrated railcar solutions including manufacturing, maintenance, parts, fleet management, and leasing, helping you reduce downtime, optimize your fleet, and stay ahead of demand. Because efficiency isn't a goal, it's a competitive edge. Trinity Rail, built to deliver.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. It is Wednesday, and the bell is ringing, and the horns are sounding, and we have Bill Stevens to give us the AAR weekly traffic update. Bill, what are we seeing today?
Good afternoon. Rail traffic was up again this week in North America.
We should have like confetti. Real quick, Bill, I didn't mean to cut you off. But when it's up, we should have a confetti celebration because the economy is rocking. So what are you saying?
I think we're going to have to increase the confetti budget this year.
Do you think so? Because I'm all for it. I mean, we can do virtual AI confetti. We are a little AI forward here.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's cheaper, more sustainable.
We just need a screen graph when. So I'm talking to my production team. They're listening. You are being listened to. We need some confetti, guys, when the rail traffic is up.
So carload volume in North America was up 4.7% compared to a year ago.
That's a big
Intermodal
number.
volume was up. Yeah, intermodal was up 5.1%. That gives us a total for North America of an increase year over year of 4.9% for week 32. A lot of this is due to Canada. They had both a strong year-over-year carload and intermodal growth, which is something we haven't seen from Canada in a while, and a lot of that was due to CPKC, an increase in traffic
Now,
there.
are the Canadians waking up? Because I know that their economy's been pretty weak.
Well, is it all grain? Is it all grain?
What's driving it?
Yeah, so grain was definitely a part of it. That it's the end of one crop year and the beginning of a new one. They had a bumper crop last year, and so
we learned that word today.
Bill, we had Thom Albrecht that said this is going to be a corn year, bumper
corn year. We didn't know what that meant.
I didn't
now
know
we know.
I'm not a farmer. So it's a good year.
Well, yeah, exactly. But looking at the U.S., carload volume was up 1% in week 32 for the Class 1 railroads. Intermodal was 2.7% higher than a year ago, which gives us an overall total of up 2% over 2025's week 32. Most traffic segments, as we've seen for much of the year, were in the green for the week. In fact, 8 of the 10 commodity groups that the AAR tracks were up for the week. And the 3 biggest ones in the carload side of the business, they're coal, chemicals, and grain. Coal continued its downward trend at minus 5.5%. Chemicals were relatively flat at up 0.4%. And grain was up 3.4%. A real outlier this week was motor vehicle and parts. They were in the red at minus 13% for the week. and everything else is pretty well moving
So
along.
motor vehicle and parts were up compared to this week last year out of Mexico, like a ton,
But
right?
this is also
But down everywhere
is
else.
Liberation Day. Was the tariff having to do with that, Bill, or is something else going on?
Don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, there's so many issues going on right now in terms of affordability and loan prices and automaker incentives.
Yesterday, we had somebody from Cox Automotive on FreightWaves Today. She was talking about how strong the auto market movement, at least traffic, is in terms of car movement, mostly truck through cars. And she seemed like it was a really robust market. I got the take.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's new car deliveries or if that's also used cars.
I mean, both, they do both,
yeah.
right? So there's a little bit of that going on. I mean, I think, there's so many make and models out there that are just great, but they're so expensive. I mean, just the thought of like what you're seeing in terms of, there's like a sticker shock if you got to buy a car. But there's so many cool vehicles out there. So Bill, I got the new issue of Trains. I don't know if it hadn't hit the newsstands yet. I think early.
You got it before me.
Well, it is early. What are you talking about in this issue? I just got it. It came in this morning. What should readers, why should they subscribe to the latest issue?
Well, the latest issue is a theme issue. We've done these from time to time where we take a look at railroads in a particular state. This is New York State, the Empire State theme issue. So we look at everything that's gone on in New York State. What people think of, if you're into railroads and railroad history, is the New York Central and the 20th Century Limited, which was the train of trains. It's known as the world's most famous trains for a while, ran between New York Grand Central Terminal and Chicago in about 16 and a half hours at its peak schedule. And that was something that, there was a red carpet and all the celebrities rode it. There was a barber shop on board, for example. You could have your shoes shine by the time you got to Chicago in the morning. So that was a part of it. But we also looked at what freight moves in the state. And it's mostly, as you can imagine, a consumption market. Not that much is made in New York State anymore. It's also a little bit distorted by the fact that much of the traffic that is bound for the New York metro area is now handled in New Jersey. Historically, going back several decades, it was handled in New York City proper, but everything migrated over to the New Jersey side of the river. So we look at CSX, we look a little bit at Norfolk Southern, and of course our news coverage, we have updates on the UP Norfolk Southern proposed merger, and there was some news regarding that this week as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So new developments in the merger, the STB adopted a formal review schedule. Final decision is now pushed well to the back end of 2027, but there are some deadlines set around it, right? Can you talk us through that?
That's right. What they did is, after accepting the revised application is complete in May, the board put its review on hold, and they ordered the railroads to provide additional information. And the review schedule would push a final decision well into the second half of 2027, and final briefs would be due May 28th of 2027. The board did not set a date for the close of record. That's important because a decision would be due 90 days after the close of record, assuming that the final environmental review is completed by then. And the board's decision yesterday did not address the merits of the application or any of the comments filed since UP and NS submitted their supplemental filing on July 27th. BNSF, CSX, CPKC, and shipper groups, in one way or another, since July 27th, have asked the STB to reject the application. And this STB decision yesterday really was consistent with prior decisions the board has issued regarding the UP-NS merger, because the board asked for additional information. In this case, regulators wanted the railroads to show all of the data behind some market share and traffic projections that they put into their supplemental filing. And the work papers that the railroads submitted said, some of that data, you don't need to see that, it wasn't relevant. The board disagreed and says it wants to see all of it. So it's basically a trust but verify outlook at the board.
Anything surprised you in terms of what you've heard in the market, perhaps from any of the filings, any of the, I know the STB is sort of like in a quiet period, we'll call it, but anything that you're just sort of seeing or hearing right now that should be on our radar?
No, I think everything's been consistent in this merger as it has been with prior mergers. The two merging railroads like it, CN, which was among the railroads to oppose the deal. They now say they're not going to oppose it after reaching a deal for better access with Union Pacific. And then the remaining railroads are opposed to it. And what's interesting is that shipper groups are opposed to it. However, you do have some big customers that have come out in support of it. Nissan would be one example. They came out in support of the merger a couple weeks ago.
And joining Bill, and maybe you can't discuss this. Well, you're a reporter, maybe you should. Do we think there's some backroom dealings, negotiation? Maybe, Nissan as an example. Do we think that they got some price concessions or something that would, because it's interesting because this administration, whether you love them or hate them, is all about getting deals done. And there's a lot of stuff that happens sort of behind the scenes to get deals done. It's interesting that the rival railroads that have opposed it have shifted their position. We're seeing shippers. Do we think there's some things happening in the back end that we're not privy to?
Yes, absolutely. There are always additional negotiations between the merging railroads, shippers, as well as other railroads to try to build support for their merger. At the end of the day, that's what they want. They want to show regulators that shippers are behind this, that other railroads are not opposed to it, and that we've taken all the steps that we can in order to enhance competition.
It's the art of the deal. Nobody connected to the administration is going to question backroom dealings and art of deal. So it's sort of written in a book. So, Bill, what other sort of developments are you seeing in terms of the rail market that we should be watching?
Really, the elephant in the room is the UP-NS merger, and we'll have to wait and see for the other shoes to drop here in terms of what the STB decides on the merits of the application and the opposition points that have been raised by the other railroads.
By the way, is this going to be in a press conference? Is this going to be a grand reveal? Matt Loeffler and I talked about going to the Supreme Court steps and like hanging out there waiting for the Montgomery decision. It happened so much faster than we expected, so we were caught off guard. But what can we expect? Is this just some white paper that gets released and that therefore the rule gets announced? What does this look like in terms of the major merger announcement?
If we're talking about the actual final decision, which would come sometime next year, in prior mergers, there's been a voting conference, and the board will basically announce its review of the deal, and some members may speak up about why they voted to support or reject the deal. What we saw in the last big merger, which was between Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern back in 2023, Marty Oberman, who was then the chair of the Surface Transportation Board, did hold a news conference after the decision was released, explaining his rationale for supporting the merger, one of which was improved safety. And that was top of mind then because it was just a few months after a Norfolk Southern hazardous materials derailment and spill in East Palestine, Ohio.
We should tell Patrick Bucks that, hey, when you're ready to announce this, come out on FreightWaves today and tell us you do a live. We'll go to the press conference. We'll do a live production. I think that would be pretty epic.
Would be pretty cool.
Patrick's a fan of the show. He does tune in on occasion. I know that because, and he's been a guest. He's a great guest. So Bill, I'm reading your article. You're skimming your article. One of the things I am really interested in is this whole New York sort of chemical, this is a big chemical center in the state of New York, largely due to cheap power. Anything else that our audience should know about in terms of, CSX, this is their number one bulk commodity. Does each railroad sort of have its own personality in terms of concentration of commodities? Is that the way to think of it? When we're looking at chemical shipments, are we reading CSX's numbers? We're looking at coal shipments, maybe we're reading BN's numbers. How does each railroad sort of have concentration in freight mix?
That's a great question, and freight mix is important. In the East, CSX definitely has the largest chemical franchise, and in the West, it's UP that has the largest book of chemical business. UP, in fact, has the largest carload network in North America. BNSF in the West, it's a different story there. They're the largest intermodal carrier in the U.S. by far. And Norfolk Southern is the largest intermodal carrier in the East by far. So each railroad does bring a different traffic mix into play.
Is that because of J.B. Hunt? Is that the reason BNSF is so prolific, is because of their partnership with Hunt and NS for that matter, which is an interesting thing. We went down to Arkansas, I think it was like the week of the merger announcement, and we had some meetings that some of the folks that we were meeting with were having other meetings that were perhaps more important. But is the reason that NS and BNSF are just so prolific intermodal is because of their relationship with J.B. Hunt?
That is definitely the story at BNSF. NS also has other large customers. They have the most intermodal terminals. It's over 50, I believe. In the rail industry in North America. And they've really worked to build out that intermodal network over the years. And so that's why their intermodal traffic is about 25% higher than CSX's.
Yeah.
What do you think this new lane that BNSF announced to higher frequency schedule on from Phoenix to Dallas does for BN?
I think it's good. They are talking about converting over the road business to rail. They've got a new intermodal and logistics park under construction in Phoenix. This will be massive, and it will combine warehousing on site with an intermodal terminal, and also carload traffic that will come in and go to warehouse and distribution centers on site as well. So it's a big deal for BNSF.
I hadn't thought about that, the carload traffic aspect, and getting that
out of Arizona or to Arizona?
Getting it out of California and being able to go right to California if they have warehousing and carload access in Phoenix.
The carloads go out of Arizona. A lot of that's, I mean, there's a big mining country, believe it or not, in Arizona, right, Bill?
It is,
but agriculture coming from like the what is it, San Joaquin Valley, or what's the valley in Yuma around Yuma, Arizona?
Oh, but they grow a ton of things there. You know, your vegetables in the winter. That's where they come from.
I know Dole, they sort of shift between winter vegetables around Yuma up to Monterey during the summer when that was a different growing season. So we get year-round food.
Yeah, exactly. I think much of the carload traffic that BNSF brings in to the Phoenix area is more related to the consumer and to housing. Building materials, shingles, lumber, that sort of thing.
And probably water purification, stuff like that, right? Those chemicals, because you got to have that water in Arizona. Yes, yeah. As we said earlier, yes. It is a modern miracle, Phoenix, Arizona is. We should not be in the desert. God did not intend us to live in the desert. It made it really...
Especially the very fair-skinned people.
Yeah, right? We can't take them. Fair-skinned people shouldn't be anywhere in the heat. We're going to burn, at least Julie and I will. Bill also has he's a top that he's got to consider. He wears hats.
Yep,
this
absolutely.
Is hat season. But Bill lives in Massachusetts, so Bill's got to wear hats year-round. It's in the summer, it's to keep from being burning. In the winter, it's to keep your head warm.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this isn't a vanity thing. When I wear hats, a lot of times it's just to keep my head.
My husband's the same way. Like he wears a winter hat all the time.
Yeah, you have to. It is not a vanity thing. Mm-hmm. So anyways, Bill, anything that's top of mind? By the way, I do recommend, one other thing I love about trains is the photography that goes in. And I'm trying to convert Julie into a diehard train nerd here at FreightWaves. She's not as... FreightWaves today, she's not as much into the rails as, certainly not as much as Bill will ever be, but...
Take me on a train ride.
We're going to do a train? Bill, you need to arrange, we should do a FreightWaves today. We'll take a Starlink, we'll go out into, maybe Denali National Park, or the Alaska Railroad would be pretty epic. Up to Fairbanks.
Oh, that definitely would be. I have not been there yet. I hear the trip is great.
I did it years ago. It was the Polar Express, I think is, there's now a movie after this, but it takes you through from Anchorage to Fairbanks, through Denali National Park. It's like an 8-hour, at least it was when I was there. It's like an 8-hour train ride through the park. And, you know, it's dark most of the time, so you get the Northern Lights. It was such a beautiful, beautiful ride. Bill, this was on the list of things for us to do.
Absolutely. And I had a chance to ride a private car trip on the Alaska Railroad a couple of years back, but it was the day we had to move our son into college. It conflicted with that.
So you had to cancel?
You got to do what you got to do.
I have an idea. I have an idea, Julie. I don't know if you're into this, but I think for this holiday season, because, you know, it's a slow time of year in freight, I think we should go to Alaska, and I think we should do the Alaska Railroad. And then I think we should do the Linden, you know, they have dog sleds that they deliver freight. Linden,
Seriously?
Alaska. Yes, I'm
Oh my God,
serious.
that's so cool. Yeah.
They also have these, like
You think
cargo.
you could take the cold?
Can I take the cold?
Yeah.
Is that your question? Hell yeah. Like 100, it's all about layers.
That's right.
110, you know, just like load up. It would be epic. We could do it. Bill, are you into this?
You know, we skiers have a saying, there's no bad weather, only bad clothing.
Alyeska Resort, you ski. I think it's a 4-star resort outside of Anchorage. You're actually skiing at sea level. Pretty epic place. I went there, 20 years ago. My son and his mother went there a couple of years ago. Pretty epic. That's on the agenda. FreightWaves Today will take you to Alaska over the holidays, but tomorrow.
you.